All right.
Mono.
Okay.
I gotta talk to you about
Mono a mono.
Fernazak. No, just
What the
I just
heck?
need
You're
a date.
amongst friends
I
here.
ran into him skiing.
Are we good?
Yes.
All right, we're good. Good afternoon and Happy New Year to members of council and staff, the general public that's here. I see that we have quorum, and I call this special meeting of council to order. I do want to express appreciation to councilors for making the time to be here. This application, as you note from the report, was time dependent, and we know that council has said we want to roll out the red carpet and cut the red tape. So I do appreciate council living up to that expectation and being here for this special meeting. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. And it has been moved by Councillor Ribbiak, seconded by Councillor King, that the agenda for this special meeting be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. The next item is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Do any members have any pecuniary interest they need to disclose at this time? Can that be noted that none do? And the next is the presentation and consideration of the report. It has been moved by Councillor Durley, seconded by Councillor Papp. The council received the issue summary report regarding the execution of a development agreement for consent application B1-2013P for 973 Church Street. Eddie, Emil, and Nada Maklovic, is that how you say that? And the council direct the clerk and the mayor to enter into a development agreement, and that council consider the bylaw as presented on this evening's agenda for the execution of the development agreement. Is there any discussion regarding the report? Questions, comments? Councillor Ribbiak.
I have just a few, and we were just discussing them. But in a general sort of way, my understanding is that a development agreement of this type is not legislatively required. It's a requirement. It was a condition placed by the Committee of Adjustment, and my understanding is this was at Al's request. He apparently had some specific issues, and my questions then are two. Number one, are those issues dealt with in some way within the bylaw that differs from the usual boilerplate about these issues, or is it just covered in the general text? And the other is, are these issues that would not have been covered by the building permit process otherwise?
Thank you. Mr. CEO, can you answer those questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Partially. I can't give you some of the background context, as I'm not familiar with it. I'm simply going by the files, but that's correct that the Public Works Manager, or Director rather, recommended that, or one of the comments was that they enter into development agreement with the owner. And just looking at the notes, it seems that there was some alteration made to the Swayze drain, and that there was concern with drainage and stormwater management. So the planning director at the time reinforced the recommendation and made that as part of the submission to the committee. It is not a legislative requirement. And speaking with the clerk a few moments ago, she's recommending that we discontinue this sort of process with using this large agreement and come up with a condensed version, if you will, or an easier process to go through in these types of developments, which is one thing. The other thing is that we cover a lot of these concerns off during a pre-consult now, which we weren't doing a year ago. So a lot of these issues are handled up front and avoid this type of thing. So that's the best answer I have to give on that question.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor?
Thank you. So, because we really don't know what it was that was bothering Al, we don't know, we can't answer whether this development agreement is actually speaking to those particular issues and we can't really assure ourselves that those issues are being looked after as a result of this. Is just rubber stamping this thing, otherwise it doesn't happen.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr.
Well,
Mayor.
my question is maybe a little bit more specific than that. The director was involved. I mean, in the terms here, anytime there's the word director, it's the director of public works. That's so. Mr. CEO, can you just speak to the director's involvement in this agreement? Would he have seen it, etc.?
Oh yeah, the director would have been involved all along, and is involved in the drafting of the agreement. So there's no concern on the end of staff with this particular thing. This is simply, I don't want to use the word rubber stamp, but it is simply a time-sensitive issue. Otherwise, it would have just gone to council on the 13th as a regular piece of business. But because the condition expires prior to the next council meeting, and we didn't receive anything until right before the Christmas break, the decision was made to have a special meeting so that the applicant didn't have to go back and go through the whole process all over again.
Anything further, Councillor?
Just an observation, obviously, this is all about a lot and a single residence, single-family residence that's gonna be built on that. You know, it doesn't strike me like there's anything there that couldn't have been covered with the building permit, but other than that, fine, let's go ahead with
Okay,
it.
all right, thank you very much. Others? Councillor Lane?
I just have a question as to the building of this single unit or whatever is going to be behind the drainage issue, behind the creek? Is that the idea behind this?
Mr. CEO?
Behind it.
Yeah, like the drainage runs through the property. There's room in front to build a unit. There's room also in the back to build a unit. So my question is, where do they perceive building the unit?
I'm just looking for the drawing. It would be on the front, facing church.
So the creek's in the backyard.
Yes.
That map's not, doesn't appear to be part of the package that council
No,
has.
this is in the file.
Is that where the building is? Okay.
There's been a lot of woodland cleared and everything, right? So, and there's a large clearing in the back behind the, what do you call it? The creek or whatever it is through there. And my question is if the unit is going to be built in the front? That was my only question. It looks like it.
They see a condition about where they can build in relation.
Yeah, because they'd have a
Madam
setback
Clerk?
from that.
Can you comment on that, Madam
Through you,
Clerk?
Mr. Chair, I believe there is a condition on the consent as well, on the decision that states where the NPCA would allow building in relation to the creek. If the CAO wants to pull out the decision, it would be in there, but the NPCA did comment on where building can take place. And they set specific buffering guidelines with the creek.
Okay. So then, in fact, it's right on Church Street and right across from the park, right? And is any of this property, to you, Mr. Mayor, in the
ahead.
green belt?
It's in the urban boundary, I believe, Mr.
And
CEO.
that's correct, it is in the boundary.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. We can pass that down this way. perhaps. For other councilors, other questions by members of council? Councilor Durley?
Just a suggestion, Mr. Mayor, since the director is not here and the questions that we're asking are directly related to what he's done and not really suggesting that he's not doing his job properly or that the building is going to be built in non-compliance with anything, but if there are these questions, I'm just wondering if we could get a letter of explanation, not that it really matters because that's like they're going to do it properly anyway, but just as a matter, if it's curiosity that's killing the cat here, let's get something that will allow us to understand it and perhaps put some council members' minds at ease.
Okay, thank you. Is councilor suggesting, do we want further information? And do you want it in writing from the director? Because the director isn't present? Or are we comfortable with it, that it's covered off in the development agreement?
Further, I'm in reading this and looking at it and my past experiences and looking at the property, I have no problem with it. Just if some people do, then perhaps, curiosity killed the cat, so let's satisfy that curiosity.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My issue is not with the substance of this thing. I think that it's great that a house is going to be built there within the urban limits. It really helps. It's really a question about the process, because we are here assembled as we have to be on an irregular day for us to meet in really terrible conditions, because something absolutely has to be done, which strikes me as actually not absolutely having to be done. Some other course of action could have been recommended. So I'm just looking at the process and hoping that maybe out of this discussion we might in fact come up with a different or better process so that we don't find ourselves like this again.
I think it was, I'm just gonna comment on that, Counselor. Staff recommendation, quite frankly, was to let it lapse. I thought, well, let's check with council to see if council might be available, and so that this can be approved. Why put this person through the rigmarole of going through and issuing a whole new application, going to committee again, et cetera, et cetera? Committee would probably have said no development agreement, maybe, or whatever, and just proceed. This way, the development agreement is there. You know, we can meet, if we can take 15 minutes out of our day to come here and show the development that we are interested in it occurring. So, once we had, we knew that there was quorum, it was recommended, yeah, let's proceed with the meeting, let's have the meeting and deal with the matter. So that's why it was dealt with in this way. I think the applicant did state, and I understood this from discussions with the deputy clerk, that they had thought that there was a council meeting on January 6th or 6th, and that they could have proceeded, et cetera, and they were well within their time limits, et cetera. Somehow they had that understanding, even though we all knew that it wasn't until the 13th. So in an effort to be as accommodating as possible, I suggested, let's see if council can meet. So that's why we're meeting. But your recommendation, your suggestion regarding, do we need to do a development agreement always? Because we only have one size that fits all for one house. When a development agreement, we would be having the same requirement if there's 20 houses. We'd have the same or similar boilerplate development agreement. That's a good recommendation. And from what I heard from staff is that they're considering different options. I think just quickly, my understanding I think of some other development that's occurred in the town when there's been one or two houses on a property. I can think of the one at Sandra and Maple, for instance. They had to go through a development agreement. I think staff have recommended in the past a development agreement be used because of development that occurred many years ago where somebody would come in for a severance for one piece, come in for a severance for another piece, then all of a sudden you have 20 homes built on a piece of property through a number of years. And so I think somehow we have to find a happy medium between the two extremes. And I think that's why staff are now saying we can look at other options. Councillor?
Thank you. And if I can just add to that recommendation, that maybe the development agreement, since it's not a legislative requirement, can be used when there are exceptional circumstances that can't be covered pro forma in a building permit process. So that way we would know why it is that we are going to that measure and ensuring that, in fact, something meaningful is happening as a result of it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. CEO, any further?
Just to comment, Mr. Mayor, that a lot of these issues are now caught during the pre-consult. So if there's a requirement for or concern with regards to stormwater, that we would say you need to deal with stormwater, as opposed to saying you need a development agreement because we don't know what you're going to do with stormwater. So I think we've done a good job of that, but we'll still certainly investigate a condensed version of these types of agreements if they are in fact warranted for certain circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? You okay, Councillor Papp, or you're?
Just quickly, are there any other ones that we're aware of? No. This is the only one. So it's a one-off, it's done from here on in? Okay, that's good.
Okay, thank you. Were you ready for the question? I'm going to call it now. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Papp, second by Councillor Lane, that Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaw, do now read a first, second, and third time and do now pass the same, and that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. Bylaw 3450 being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to enter into a development agreement with Eddie, Emil, and Nada Meklovic. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. And it's been moved by Councillor Durley, second by Councillor King, that the following confirming bylaw be read a first, second, and third time and passed. Bylaw 3451 being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of council of the town of Pelham at its special meeting held on the 6th day of January 2014. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Moved by Councillor Durley, second by Councillor Papp, the special meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting of council scheduled for Monday, January 13th unless sooner called by the mayor. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you again, councilors.
Why is it tickling them?
That's a Nancy Bizzato term.
Oh, is it?
Tickle pile.
A little less critical there.
Okay.
Can I,
Happy first
can we
day
do a
back.
caucus, council?
Happy first day back.
Can we do a kick the clerk out and do a quick caucus?